Welcome back. We are then going to move on to our next concept, which is food chains and food webs. All biotic components in an ecosystem need energy to survive, all living organisms. So the sun is the main source of energy on Earth. A food chain shows the transfer of energy between organisms. Now, let's speak about that. That is the whole point of a food chain. It is to show us the transfer of energy from one organism to the next. So when animals and plants die, their energy is released back into the environment as heat energy. The food chains always start with a producer. Plants use the energy from the sun to make food. So plants are our producers. And in most cases, food chains begin with producers because that is what the consumers need to eat before other types of consumers start eating. The energy is then transferred from the producers to consumers, just like I have mentioned. So a food chain will then end with decomposers. As you can see from this picture, we have grass, which is our producer. Then this grass is obviously eaten by our cow, and then the cow is eaten by a human being. But now there is no arrow going towards the decomposers. This is because this consumer could die, and then the decomposers only then will have the opportunity to break down the body or the remains of the dead organism and then be able to eat and also recycle the nutrients. So that is why we did not put an arrow over there. Right. So moving on to our next slide, we need to also understand that animals that eat plants are called primary consumers because they are the first people to consume anything. So we refer to them as primary consumer. Primary means first. Then animals that eat primary consumers are then referred to as secondary consumers. So as you can see from this picture, we have our maize, which is the producer, and then we have a locust, which is our primary consumer. Now, we said that an organism that is going to eat the primary consumer is now referred to as what? As secondary consumers. In this instance, it's the lizard. Right. So moving on to our next point, animals that eat secondary consumers, which is mostly predators, these are referred to as tertiary consumers. So this lizard, which was our secondary consumer, is now eaten by the snake, which then occupies the position of a tertiary consumer. Then we are going to move on to what food webs are. Right. So a food web is made up of interconnected food chains. So a food web is not something new. It's just that now we started with a simple transfer of energy, which was a food chain. But now we have more than one food chain, and these are interconnected. So the reason for this is that animals sometimes eat more than one kind of food. I want us to look at the picture alongside. So if you can see, the grass is eaten by the rabbit. But now this very rabbit is eaten by the hawk, and it's also eaten by the fox. So it's eaten by more than one animal. So that is why we end up with a food web instead of a food chain. Food chains in an ecosystem are interlinked, just like how I've explained it now. This means that animals can be part of more than one food chain, of course. If you look at this again, we have a producer, which is the plant. This plant, the grass, is eaten by the mouse. This mouse is eaten by the owl. This very mouse is eaten by the hawk. It's also eaten by the fox. So now, if you can see that this mouse is involved in more than one food chain. So that is why we are saying they are interconnected and interlinked. Food webs help us to understand what animals eat. Obviously, if you are looking at the arrows which show us the transfer of energy or the direction of the energy, you are able to understand what this animal is eating and what it doesn't eat. Right, that is it for food chains and food webs. So we are going to look at our last concept, which is the trophic levels. So the energy that flows in an ecosystem comes from the sun. We've already mentioned that the genesis of all of this is the sun, because it gives us energy. The very same energy is taken in by plants, and then the plants are eaten by other animals, and that is how this energy is transferred. So we need to constantly remember the main source of energy, which is the sun. So the energy flows through an environment by means of a series of feeding levels. Right. So each stage of the feeding in a food chain is called a trophic level. Now I want us to look at the picture alongside. We have a pyramid. Now if you look at this pyramid, it starts off with producers down here. In this instance, we have cactus. And then this cactus is eaten by mice, which is up here. Right. This mice is then eaten by the scorpions, which is up there. And then the scorpions are eaten by the rattlesnake. So if you can look at this, how it's structured, it is an indication, oh no, not an indication, but an example of a food chain. So now we say that each stage of the food chain is referred to as a trophic level. So this is a trophic level. This is a trophic level. This is a trophic level. Let me just erase these lines. Right. So the trophic levels form a food pyramid. So obviously, as you can see, it's a pyramid. This shape is the pyramid. So this pyramid shows how much energy is available at each level. So if you can see from the producers, we have a lot of them. That means there's more energy. But as you go up, the energy starts to do what? To decrease. So when you go further up, that is why the more you go up, there's less organisms, because now there is less energy being transferred to the top of the pyramid. So a food pyramid has a maximum of 4 or 5 levels. So how many levels do we have on this example? We have 1, 2, 3, 4 levels. So we have our producers, our primary consumers, our secondary consumers, and our tertiary consumer, which is our predator, the rattlesnake. Energy at each trophic level is used for life processes, while some energy is released as heat. So that is why we need energy. We need energy to perform life processes. In addition to that, an organism uses up to 90% of its energy from the food for its life processes. So that means if an organism eats a plant and then the energy is transferred into the organism, that means 90% of that energy is going to be used up by the animal that is eating this plant for its own life processes. So only about 10% of the energy goes to the new body cell and is available to the next animal when it gets eaten. So whenever you are eating, you are using about 90% of that energy in your body, and only 10% will be transferred to the next animal or organism that is going to eat you or eat an animal. So the loss of energy at each trophic level can be shown by an energy pyramid, which you've already seen. So the trophic levels are showing us how much energy is available at each level, and then how the energy is spent going up until the last parts where we have our tertiary consumers. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.